Now that we've created the splash, we're going to use the same approach to create the drips that would be on the edges of the bottle. I'll start by putting a new layer in, and I'm going to go to my swatches, and I'll start by using my pen tool, and I'll draw the shape I want using the pen tool up along the perimeter of the bottle. I'll right click inside and choose Make Selection. I'll click OK. I'll use the yellow I used for the larger splash. I'll add a new layer. It's a good idea to name these as you go. Keep them organized because you're going to have at least 3 layers for all this stuff. I'm building up this edge in anticipation of the white value that will eventually be on top of it to give it that third value and the dimension that we need. I'll add yet another layer for the white light, a reflection, and I'll go to Select, Modify Contract by 5, and then I'll change my brush foreground color to white. I'll get my brush. I'm going to hide the selection so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better here. And maybe it would fall something like this. Kind of dissipating up towards the top more. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to put a Gaussian blur on that immediately. And I might use a layer mask to eliminate any harsh edges I might have. Now that I've created a drip on the side of the bottle, I'm going to put something similar to that on the interior of the bottle as well. I'll probably want to put a couple of these individual bubbles as well. I like P on the keyboard, and I'll start to draw the shape. This is where you get the opportunity to have something follow the contour of the bottle and really kind of enhance the 3D quality we're looking for. So it's essentially a variation on the drip that's on the side of the bottle up at the top. I'll make a selection. I'll add a new layer. Now, at this point, I'm probably, depending on the values, if this selection were over here, I probably wouldn't need the yellow layer, but I would probably use a sepia and a darker brown layer. So I'll go ahead and I'll do that one. I'll put this here, and then I'm going to get my eyedropper tool, and I'll start out with a lighter value sepia, and I'll go in around the perimeter of it. And then I'm going to add a new layer, and I'll get a little darker color, perhaps an umber, anything with a darker value. And once I've established kind of that sepia, I'm going to hide the selection, and then I'm going to drop the opacity maybe to 50%. I'll make the brush a bit smaller, and I'll try to stay outside the edge of the shape almost entirely. And if where it gets thinner, you might want to even reduce your brush size using the open and close brackets to make it larger or smaller. Now I'm going to add one last layer, and that will be for the white light. I'll get white, and I'm going to make the selection with a reduction in size, so I'll go to Select, Modify, Contract. I'll leave it at 5. I'll hit Command H to hide it. I'll get my brush, and might be a little whiter in one spot, perhaps down where the water gathers in a larger volume. And on that layer, I'm going to put a Gaussian blur. I might put a convert to smart object on the layer, and then go to filtered blur or Gaussian blur. I can now get my pen tool, and I'm going to put a new layer in, and I'm going to start to add in a couple of these little bubbles. So I'll go ahead and create a couple of bubbles. I'll right click inside the selection and choose Make Selection, and I'll start to add layers and develop that element as well. I'm putting the elements that comprise this drip into a group so that I can keep track of the layers for this specific piece. I'll put a new layer in, Sepia. Get my eyedropper tool, I'll grab the color I think I might want to use. Take my brush, and I've got it set for about 50%, and that's a good place to start off. I'll put a new layer in and get the darker values, that umber color I've been using. I'll hide the selection. Maybe I'll drop the opacity of the brush down a bit so that I can control just how dark it might turn out. And I want a little bit more of the sepia in the middle, so I'll get the brush, bump up the scale, drop the opacity about 20, and then I'll add just a little bit more there. Now with my selection, I'm going to go to Select, Modify, Contract, and I'll leave it at 5. I'll put a new layer in for the white value. I'll hit D on the keyboard and then X to put the white on top. I'm going to hide the selection so I can see what I'm doing here. Now, in this case, there might be more light in one spot, depending on where the light source was. So it might be a little bit brighter in one spot. Just maybe a little bit of it showing like that. And I'm going to go to Filter, and I'll click on Gaussian Blur. Now what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to merge these three, because this can be kind of a real utility piece in the sense that I can go in and create variations on the shape of the bubbles I'm seeing up here. I'm going to name it, and I'm going to make a marquee selection around it. And if I go to my Move tool and hold the Option key, I can drag a copy of this. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to deselect, I'll get the marquee and make a selection of just it. And I'm going to go to Filter, and I'm going to go to Liquify, because now I can use that same drip, and by just editing it in the Liquify menu, I can come up with a lot of variations rather than create multiple pieces. So I'll transform that one maybe, and maybe I'll put that over there. I'll go back to the original. I'll marquee select that and drag that, and I'll put that one maybe here. I'll deselect, make a broad selection around it, and I'll go up to Filter, Liquify, and maybe I'll change the size of the brush, and I'll just work this contour a little differently. And then I'll transform that. Now there's one thing I'll do. I'll need a drop shadow on these elements as well as the drip. I'll start with the bubbles, and once we're done with the bubbles, it'll be clear how to do it with that drip as well. Now that I've merged it together, I'm going to go over to the layer window. I'm going to go to the FX, and I'm going to choose a drop shadow. And you'll see that once you introduce a drop shadow and you start to play with the distance, the opacity, and the direction, that it'll give you that last element that will make it look like those drips are on the side of the bottle. So maybe it's a matter of playing with the opacity or even the blend mode. These are all options to get what you may want. Click OK on this. I've left these kind of big. Obviously, they'd be a lot smaller. So what I'll do is I'll just grab some of the smaller ones I made, and perhaps I would reduce them in scale. I'll quickly go through the blend modes too to see if there's anything else I might want. So I'll hit V on the keyboard. I'll hold the Shift key and hit plus or minus on the keyboard. In this case, I really just kind of went with a lot of dark browns. It might be a matter of dropping the opacity. These are all options that you'll have to explore in the context of your own choices as far as the colors and values of your bottle.